You're right in thinking that mind and body are very closely connected. So when there are issues with your physical health, it does have an impact on your mental health. Those who suffer with mental illness will also then progress to have various physical illnesses. It could be because of medication. Some medications don't suit some patients. It could be post-operative. It could be because they're in a lot of pain. So as we get older, arthritis is very common, rheumatoid arthritis. It could be post-surgical, where you're still in pain even though you've recovered, you're rehabilitated. It could be a urinary tract infection which hasn't actually manifested itself yet. So there are various reasons why someone can present with delirium. Sometimes she's so difficult. She's shouting, she's irritable, you can't talk to her, she doesn't want to eat, and yet at other times she's fine. And because we're human, we tend to relate it to when my brother's around, she's really good, but when I'm taking care of her, she's really angry. Now that's coincidence. With delirium, it is actually up and down. So you can have periods of being absolutely cognitively present.
In earlier times, they used to speak about goiter. Is that, what's the connection, or what's that?
Okay.
I don't hear that word too much these days.
So goiter is when you have an overactive thyroid. Sometimes your thyroid gland, which is at the base of your neck here, can become, when it's overactive, it becomes bigger than normal, and it can look like a bulge. And so that we call goiter. Yeah. Not used very much anymore, yes.
Hello again, and welcome to the episode of Aging Gracefully, a talk show for evergreens. This is part 2 of our discussion on the relationship of mental well-being and physical ailments and the impact that one has over the other. We are happy to have with us our panelists again, Father Juvi and Dr. Angeliqueka. I'm thinking of vitamin deficiencies, Doctor, something that we all go through at one stage or the other. And would you like to say something about that?
So vitamin deficiencies relating to mental health symptoms, is that?
Yes,
okay, right. All right. So if we think about, we've talked about calcium. We've mentioned that, how important it is. But hand in hand with calcium is vitamin D. So for calcium to be absorbed, you need to have a good level of vitamin D in your body. Interestingly, most people will be either normal or below normal for vitamin D. And when I say normal, I mean just normal, not enough. So vitamin D is something that is very important throughout your body. So neurologically, for fluid retention, for skin, for hair, it's an important vitamin, and a deficiency in vitamin D can lead to mental health symptoms, not as severe as you might see in delirium, but it's more insidious. So the onset is more gradual, and you have problems with focus, with concentration, with appetite, with energy levels, and mood. So people with a severe vitamin D deficiency can become very low in mood. Now, is there a direct correlation between vitamin D and depression?
Yes.
That hasn't been found yet, but the symptoms that it presents are very much like depression. So the apathetic kind of presentation again, a lack of energy, lack of focus, the kind of hopelessness. All of that goes with very severe vitamin D deficiencies. Also with the B complex deficiencies, B12 especially. B12 can, in severe depletion, can bring on symptoms of dementia. The forgetfulness, the delusional belief sometimes. So very important vitamins. As we get elderly, we might not absorb them as easily. So supplements are necessary. They used to say that people in countries with bright sunshine and hotter temperatures don't need it, but that isn't true anymore. The absorption levels don't seem to be as high as they used to be. So we all, at some point, will have a vitamin D deficiency. So good to make sure that your D3 is at a level that it should be, to avoid the kind of impact it has on other systems in your body.
And does this deficiencies, any one of these deficiencies, have its effect on skin pigmentation? Because a colleague of mine burst into a skin pigmentation, decolorization of the skin, and they said it was a deficiency, which he then went to underwent extensive period of treatment. He's thankfully the skin has returned back to normal. One predominant factor was that he would enter the office before sunrise and exit the office after sunset. And so we were wondering whether this correlated to exposure to the sun, now that you mentioned long exposures to sun. So is there any correlation to this? And
there used to be. I think we still get quite a bit of, we can still absorb quite a bit of vitamin D because of our weather here. Colder climates, less so. But the direct correlation between vitamin deficiency and pigmentation is slightly more insidious, because melatonin is what is the pigmentation in your skin. So something has triggered the melatonin in his skin to be able to present with the problem that he did. So it is reversible usually. Some conditions aren't. But with the right treatment, like you said, whatever deficiency it was, it's reversible. So once you pump up the body with the right levels of vitamins, whatever the deficiency is, you should be able to regain normalcy, basically. So moving on with vitamin D deficiency and its close link to calcium, osteoporosis is one of the important conditions that can occur with vitamin D deficiency and a calcium deficiency. You also are then prone to fractures. So basically osteoporosis means a thinning of the bones. So you're more prone to fractures. Even a slight fall can cause a fracture in the elderly. So it's imperative that the vitamins are of a level that can keep you intact as much as possible. The integrity of your bones and the heart and the fluid balance, all of that plays a part. But so also, if you have too much of calcium in your system or too much of vitamin D, most of the vitamin D will be excreted. What the body doesn't need, you will get rid of. But with too much of calcium in your system, you can have cardiac complications, because if you think about it, it's the calcium ions that help the cardiac muscle. So if you've got too much of that, you can have irregular heartbeat. On the mental health side, you become very anxious, very irritable. You have this dread, the fear that something's going to happen. It can lead to a psychotic illness. And so, again, the right levels are important, because quite often what we find with the elderly is, because they're aware of the thinning of their bones and osteoporosis and the risk of fractures, they take more than they need. And the body doesn't then expel the surplus, if you like, because of, slowing down of renal function or whatever. And it can lead to all of these symptoms. So
another dimension that is sometimes when people have been diagnosed with the condition of osteoporosis, the fear of a fracture or the fear of a fall really impacts the way of even taking a normal walk or
it
those.
limits them.
It limits them, and how that impacts. We're talking about this connection between physical health and mental condition, and I think just putting it out there of how one needs to be prudent, but at the same time not to be overly cautious.
Absolutely. To not having enough exercise and not being able to go out as much as you want to makes you quite self-isolated, and that can lead to low mood again, and a sense of not having that social support around you for those who live alone. So yes, you're absolutely right, Father.
And sometimes the transition to moving to the help of a walking stick or even a walker, which brings a certain amount of safety and security. But yet, what will people say that I'm now stuck with
Accepting.
accepting. It's a struggle for them. We should not dismiss these fears and just, but because it's coming from something deep within, how do we bring them to that realization that while this is a condition, how does one cope with it to the best way possible without regressing into certain areas? So thank you for spelling out all the different dimensions of it, Angeliqueka.
You're welcome, Father.
Father Juvie, in your pastoral care, you would have come across many kinds of questions that people ask you, about the emotions and all that they're going through. Could you share some of those experiences with us?
Yeah, I thank God for the vast experience that I've received and for the people who have entrusted these. So I didn't get my white hair for nothing. But you can hear the pain of these people who really want to unburden themselves. And I can recall some of the phrases that some of them have said to me. My physical health is important, but right now I don't have the time or the energy or the money to focus on my mental health. And this is something that, so it's like you're pitting one aspect of health against the other, when precisely the point we're trying to say how they interact and have that influence. And I will keep insisting also the spiritual health. But maybe just the correlationship between, this is more important, let's leave that and leave it.
So sometimes it's people thinking one's more important than the other, Father, but it's also sometimes just not recognizing the symptoms. There's a huge stigma that goes with mental health, mental illness and mental health symptoms. So people ignore them. They minimize the mental health symptoms, because how do you talk to someone and say what you're going through without worrying about them laughing at you or saying you're mad, or the stigma that goes with it. And unfortunately, by and large, people think you're either mad or you're not mad. They seem to lose lots of in-between symptoms and illnesses that mental health brings up. So if someone is, for example, if someone is actually experiencing delusions, for example, so the elderly, you're sitting there and you think, I'm sure someone walked into this room, but I don't know who it was, or was it them? And you go up to them and say, did you just come into the room? What did you want? And they said, no, we were nowhere near. You then look silly. And then next time that happens, and if it becomes more severe, with the psychosis, for example, takes hold, you're not going to tell anyone, because you're the laughing stock. And then you're going to think, am I really going mad? I can't tell that to anybody. I don't want to be locked away. So, a certain generation believes that if you have a mental illness, you're locked away in a mental health hospital like it used to be. So there's so much fear that goes with recognizing and accepting symptoms of a mental illness. So I think either they don't think it's important enough initially, or when it is starting to become important, they just don't have the confidence to be able to share that with someone, till it becomes so overt that people recognize it anyway.
As you said, till it becomes so overt. I thank you for that distinction that you made earlier, and how one can be so reticent because of whatever delusion.
Yes.
There's another dimension I want to bring again, which came up in a pastoral context. My family is doing so much for me, and I don't want to burden them or think that I'm ungrateful by revealing more symptoms. So I'd rather keep it to myself, although I do suffer in silence. And so this is another dimension that really comes to the fore.
Absolutely, absolutely. Father Juvie, you're so right, because this is where a social network becomes so important, linked with a spiritual network, for example. So if you have the confidence to talk to people that you're meeting socially, friends that you've had over years, that you can just bounce ideas off or bounce symptoms off and say, are you going through this? This is what I'm going through. Where you have the confidence in a friend. You're not burdening your family. It's not one more thing that they need to worry about with you. But a friend can actually almost alleviate and say, yes, that's quite normal. I'm facing that as well, and this is what I did. Or you go to a priest, or some kind of pastoral support where you can say, this is what I'm going through. I'm not sure if it's a mental illness. I'm not sure if this is normal aging. I don't want to talk about it with my family, but where do I go for support? So if you have that social network around you, it's so important to be able to actually seek help without feeling like you're a burden.
I think this is helpful, not just because of my interaction, but so many who are listening will say, wow, so there is a way forward, there is a way out, rather than suffering in silence. And thank you for therefore throwing light on that, Angelica. Another instance that really comes to my mind of somebody who said, of course I feel depressed, but there are other things I've got to focus on. I mean, there's no point in, I can leave this in the back burner or leave it aside. And so, one sense, it gives you a sense that you know something is happening, but it's not a priority. Another statement that comes to mind that somebody made was, of course I feel depressed, but I've got other things to focus on. This can be on the back burner because I don't have the time, the energy, the money to address it. Now, at least this person has a sense of some reality, that they know that they're feeling low in spirit or depressed. But I don't think it's something that you just leave to go with the flow. It's how does one address that?
That's a good question, Father Juvie. So if I address the practical side of it first, when someone knows that there is something that's worrying them, something that's making them feel sad from time to time, but doesn't affect their functioning, we don't classify that as clinical depression. So we call that a dysthymia. So dys meaning not normal, thymia meaning mood. So it's more a dysthymia where the fact that he can focus on something else, that he can prioritize something else, means he isn't as depressed as one would see in a clinical depression. So that's a good sign. What isn't a good sign is ignoring it. So at that stage, what is helpful is taking some time out for yourself to speak to a counselor. Once a week, once a month, whatever, where you just have that you time to offload. And quite often when you unpack all the subconscious thoughts that you don't have the time and energy to deal with, that in itself is a relief, and that in itself is a treatment, if you like. So when dysthymia kind of escalates and becomes a clinical depression is when that functionality is affected. So when someone thinks, you know what, I just can't get up in the morning and go to work, I don't have the energy, I don't have the interest, he becomes what we call anhedonic, which means there's no enjoyment, there's no pleasure, nothing gives him any pleasure, he's not looking forward to anything. So he's anhedonic, he has no interest in life. Sleep is affected, either he's sleeping too much or sleeping too little. Appetite is affected, again, eating too much or eating too little. No concentration, no ability to remember, just kind of withdrawing from life. Relationships suffer because don't you have time to sit and talk to me? But I'm not interested. I'm sorry, there's nothing there. That is when someone is clinically depressed, and that's when attention needs to be paid to. Therapy is always good, always first line of approach, but also antidepressants and medication, because that is a gradual downhill progress. It'll only deteriorate unless it's treated.
Thank you. That's a great help, because for us as pastors and priests, we do have some basic counseling education. But it's also important for us, and that goes true for any family member or those caring, that when you see something that's beyond you, to know where to direct them
Absolutely.
to. And not to fight shy of any shame or stigma of getting help. Because we've said it before, if you've got a consistent headache, you go to a doctor and if you got something like a heartache or a relationship ache or whatever ache, I think to get a professional help is something that will give
Absolutely.
guidance without fighting shy of it, because we are looking here at holistic healing. of the mind, of the body, and the spirit. And we need to see how we can work together so that we really have what Jesus says, I've come that you may have life and have life to the full. John 10, verse 10. I think that's something that we really need to put into perspective. Thank you for this orientation and for this explanation. So we've been trying to look at this co-relationship between the different dimensions of our health, largely physical and mental, but also spiritual. Because once when you're sick or sort of reduced mobility, you can't work the way you used to, and if you're still holding a job, even if it's reduced with age, the fact that you don't earn something makes you feel, for some people, they feel worthless or useless. Or again, further, sometimes it affects your daily activities, things that you were doing yourself, but now you need help for. And that you can find it really demeaning that, you were so super independent, now have to rely and to be not only interdependent, but you have to depend on someone. So that's also going to affect you as well. Financially, because some people are really struggling, and that every day that they don't work or make a contribution, there's something less coming into the kitty, into your purse. That also is going to impact you. And then, of course, the whole dimension of, the more days I spend time in hospital, the bills are going to go up, and where is the money going to come? So these are things that are going to affect you on so many different dimensions. Or again, when you're thinking in terms of the mind of the man, the stress, like what is this sickness going to lead to? What will be the end, and what will it look like? That's going to cause you so much of pain. Or again, your sense of self, like, I feel worthless, I feel useless, I'm a burden to people. Even that's got a part to play in this whole unfolding of the ill health that they're facing on different fronts. Then, of course, sometimes the relationship in the family, some of them will rally around you, and that's wonderful, but others just leave you to your own devices. You fend for yourself, so you're not only bearing the burden of age and ill health, the ones whom you nurtured and nursed, but now no longer have that time of the day. Maybe they're preoccupied with other things, but not even that little help that would really be a boost to them in this particular time. And then, of course, there's God in this picture, at the heart of it, and they wonder, like, I'm beating on the doors of heaven and God doesn't seem to answer my prayer. And this is really a struggle that affects, as I said, all dimensions of our health, the body, mind, and the spirit. And how do we, in looking at these themes, in talking about them, in praying about them, come to examine our lives? Because it really is part of a larger question. What is my image of myself now that I find myself aging and not doing what I could? What's the image of others? Some who care about me, others who don't. And what's the image of God? Is God punishing me for something that I've done? And that adds to the burden, rather than God who says, come to me who are burdened and I will give you rest. And so it's so important that these times to examine what is the operative image that we have of ourselves, of others, and of God. And that's why this discussion is really to open windows and to make that personal journey, not only within ourselves, but most of all with God, who is at the heart of this process.
Dr. Angeliqueka, I have one question for you. Does resentment, unforgiveness, and trauma affect one's mental well-being?
Yes, absolutely it does. I think when you're harboring a lot of resentment and anger and there are unresolved issues in your life, it's bound to play a part on how you feel, not only about yourself, but your concept of the world around you. So that can lead to various negative symptoms, should I say. And I won't use the word symptoms really, because I don't think it crosses over into a pathological mental illness, but you become negative about yourself, about the world. You become obsessive. If someone's done something to you, you've been traumatized, you're obsessing about that all the time. And it's very difficult then to function normally and enjoy your life normally if you are holding on to all these negative feelings. So it's about letting it go, about dealing with it, about coming to terms with it. Sometimes if something has been very, very traumatic for you, life-changingly traumatic in a way, that can cause PTSD. So it's a post-traumatic stress disorder. So it depends on the severity of the trauma. It depends on what help you got for it and what symptoms you're experiencing. So if it's just resentment, and I don't say just, I'm not putting it, I'm not minimizing it, because that is a very important emotion. It's manageable out of the realms of psychiatry. So, talking to friends, spiritual help, all of that will work. But if it is a severe trauma and you do have PTSD symptoms, then that takes it to a different category. So yes, it can affect your mental well-being, it can affect your mental health, depending on the degree, depending on the nature of the trauma, and why are you resentful, why are you angry. Finding a way to deal with it is possibly the best way forward. But absolutely, it will affect your mental well-being.
And it's something that, once again, ties into this point that we keep hammering about how the physical, the mental, and the spiritual health are so interconnected. It's true, some people have gone through severe pain at the hands of others that has caused so much of resentment within them, unforgiveness, bitterness. As we hear that famous saying, when I hold on to resentment and bitterness, it's like I take the poison and hope you will die. Now, in letting go, in forgiving, does not make a wrong a right, an unjust thing just. It's saying I will no longer allow myself to be entrapped with something that is destroying me from within. So you're able to name the wrong, the evil, the injustice, but not allow yourself to be manipulated or held back by this. There's a beautiful example of Jesus himself when he's being beaten about at the time of his passion. He says, if I've done something wrong, tell me. If not, why do you strike me? But the same Jesus from the cross says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So he was free. There was an inner freedom in letting go. Okay. And we've got persons in history who have done that. Nelson Mandela, who spent so many years of his life, locked up in Robben Island prison, isolation. And yet he was able to come back, stand against the oppressors in the apartheid system, and lead a bloodless transition and a revolution. We think of Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States, who was able, no matter how much he was attacked for being a black, but had this, one day I have a dream that we will sit around at the same table, of a man who was able, because these were people who went through severe pain. I do not want to diminish anybody's pain, struggle, or trauma. As I said, in some cases they'll need professional help, but in all cases they need the grace of God to let go. Otherwise we are stuck in a prison of our own. People do and say the worst things to us and move on, but we are there like the dog chewing on a bone. And therefore, how important, no wonder Jesus stresses so importantly for us the need to forgive. In fact, we pray a dangerous prayer every day. Forgive us as we forgive those. Forgiveness is not just a matter of goodwill or my desire or my intention. It's the grace that God gives us to let go. And His grace is available. All we need is the grace to let go and open our hearts to receive that grace, to forgive, not just from the mind, but from the heart. Because quite often we forgive from the mind, say, you did, but the heart is aching. That's why we say, I forgive, but I'll never forget. We remember, but with a healed memory, not with a tortured memory. Because with God's grace, we are forgiven from the heart. I think that is important for us to remember.
Dr. Angeliqueka, from the medical point of view, how would a doctor accept when a patient who has started on some treatment but discontinued and then turned to spiritual guidance and, much involvement in prayers and different spiritual activities, later on take a test for the same thing that they were taking the medication for and find that they are completely healed? how does the medical thing accept such a thing from that point?
All right, Nora, that's a very interesting question. I think at the heart of any medical practitioner is the hope and the endeavor to have a patient cured. So, yes, we try our best. Sometimes we are faced with situations where people say, medication's not working, I'm going to stop it. If the patient doesn't deteriorate in in his health, whether it's physical or mental health, we sit back and we hope that things will resolve. And when they do resolve, and you do come back and say, actually, even without the medication, I'm fine, it's a great joy. There isn't an ego involved in it. There isn't a sense of, you had to follow what I told you, otherwise you can't be healed. I don't think we ever underestimate the power of positive thinking and your mind over your physical health. That's a huge impact. So if a patient comes back and says, all the tests are clear, I'm perfectly all right, I didn't take the medication, it's a joy, because without the process of being treated, you're healed. So yes, it can happen, and there's no underestimating miraculous healing. There isn't. I mean, there are so many cases where you can't fathom how a patient has survived, or how a patient is, doing so well with all the physical conditions that they have. But it does happen. And so, there's no underestimating God's miraculous healing. At the same time, it's about going hand in hand with common sense, with observations. Are you getting better? Are you not getting better? Blind faith will kill you. God puts doctors in people's lives for a reason. So yes, absolutely. Try everything. It's not that if you're only going to a spiritual healer, for example, you can't take medication. They're not mutually, one or the other kind of thing. Do both. If you want to give up medication and you want spiritual healing alone, then that's your choice, that's your prerogative. But watch that the symptoms are not becoming so severe that then treating it becomes difficult. So there has to be an element of common sense in it as well. But no, all of us, what we want for our patients is for them to get better and do well. So whichever way you get there, that's, good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Doctor.
I'd like to link that to the threefold aspects of Jesus' ministry. Was to preach, to teach, and to heal. And so you find this threefold ministry in the church. The preaching and the teaching is most evident. That's why we have schools and universities. But the healing is also evident in all the clinics, the dispensaries, the hospitals. The medical colleges run so often by the church, because it's an extension of the healing ministry of Jesus. If God has given our human beings the mental faculty, it is so that we will use it for His glory, and that's for accompanying patients into the fullness of health. We also have places like Lourdes, where we have all the number of miraculous healings, which are attested, and attested by doctors to say. So in one sense, we just say a healing in a loose sense. Others, when the church, for example, and wants to canonize a saint to make sure that that miracle of healing has been attested medically. So it is not, as you put it beautifully, either or. It is both and, because God has given us. Because sometimes some people go into a crazy belief. I believe in God, I throw out my medication. And I think that's an insult to the intelligence that God has given us. So we see it both together, and how ultimately it's to bring the fullness of life, the fullness of health, the fullness of healing. And as you rightly put, there's no ego involved, because it's ultimately the glory of a person is fully alive, a person fully alive in God. So I think it's what you've asked enable us to give a broader perspective. So some who might have a single or mono-sided view of something, as I jokingly say, some are so narrow-minded they can see through a keyhole with both eyes. But we need a breadth of vision that is given to us by God Himself, and that comes to us through the preaching, the teaching, and the healing ministry of Jesus.
Thank you, Father, and thank you,
You're
Dr.
welcome.
Angelica.
You're welcome.
Father Juvi, in your many years of pastoral care, I'm sure you would have come across counseling so many of the elderly sick and those having to deal with the impact of illnesses. And we come to a point of a very spiritual low, where the questions in the minds of us in our deepest sufferings, it would be, why me? Where is God? Why all this is happening only to me and not to the rest? What do you say to us?
You know, way back in 1985, the Redemptorists chose as their theme for reflection for 6 years to evangelize the poor and to be evangelized by the poor. But basically, every Christian is not only called to evangelize, but also to allow ourselves to be evangelized. It's always a two-way process. And God has brought so many wonderful persons whom you referred to in my life. And it was never a one-way process of them coming to me. I have learned, I have experienced so much from them. It's true, some of them really we could see in a broken state, and with God's grace, you accompany them to that point of serenity in their life to where they finally are at peace and ready to go home. On the others, they've made this wonderful journey. And for me, it's purely a grace to listen to people like these, of who've been through the storms of life and yet to have come through it all. So it is not about the storms, but the grace that takes us through. As that amazing grace, how sweet the sound. It was grace that brought me safe thus far, and that grace that takes me home. And as we grow older, and we feel the frailty of our age, the burden of our years, and sometimes the pain of what we are going through, the one constant element is God. And as we grow older, we hope that that relationship gets more personal and more deep. To realize that God is on the same side as the one who suffers, rather than the one who causes suffering. And to know that that name of this God is God with us, Emmanuel, gives you strength to face it, because we will go through struggle. But to know that our hand is being held gives us the grace to go through it. And to go through it with serenity. There might be physical pain. And that's why as one grows older, for me, the real prayer is the prayer of surrender. That things we don't understand, we don't know how it's happening. It's beyond our mind, it's beyond our energy. And we say, Lord, I'm leaving it in your hands, because that's the safest place to be. But to come to that point of surrender is always a struggle. And once you come to it, you say, wow, I wish I'd done it earlier. And that is really the power of grace of God who walks with us in the storms of our life. There's a beautiful text in Isaiah 43 verses 1 to 5. You will cross the barren desert. You will go through all the storms. It's not you may, you will, but I will be with you, because I am the Lord your God. I am your Redeemer. And the more we believe in this personal relationship with God, who calls us to life, who calls us to unburden ourselves, we will know we are never alone. Because the reality of being human is we go not only through the joys, but also the struggles. Not only through the laughter, but also the pain. And to know that the unchanging, stable point of it is God really gives us, that's when faith comes alive. That's when hope blossoms. And that's when love really flourishes. You know, when you meet some elderly people, sick as they are, the moment you enter into the room, they're so concerned about you instead of their pain. And you know that, wow, this person has journeyed in grace. Others are so self-absorbed in their pain for whatever reason. And the task of a good person who accompanies them is to bring them out of that and to open to them the windows of who God really is. And that's why I come back to the image of God, the image of others, and the image of oneself. And actually, I like to therefore conclude with that psalm that so many pray every day, but today we will listen to it as a prayer in our heart. It's Psalm 91. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. For he will deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his pinions, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness is a shield and a buckler. You will not fear the terror of the night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in darkness, nor the destruction that wastes at noonday. It's talking to the different phases of one's life. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. You will only look with your eyes and see the recompense of the wicked. Because you have made the Lord your dwelling place, the Most High, who is my refuge, no evil shall be allowed to befall you, no plague come near your tent. For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. On their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. You will tread on the lion and the adder, the young lion and the serpent you will trample underfoot. Because he holds fast to me in love, I will deliver him. I will protect him, because he knows my name. When he calls to me, I will answer him. I will be there with him in trouble. I will rescue him and honor him. With long life I will satisfy him and show him my salvation. Isn't that wonderful? And then I'd like to move to just a couple of verses of Psalm 92, which you will find over here. And I would like to read verses 12, 13, and 14. The righteous flourish like the palm tree and grow like a cedar in Lebanon. They are planted in the house of the Lord. They flourish in the courts of our God. They still bear fruit in their old age. They are ever full of sap and green, to declare that the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no unrighteousness in him. And all we can say is, glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Thank you so much for being part of this experience together.
That was lovely, Father Juvi. Thank you so much, Father Juvi and Dr. Angelica, for this lovely sharing, for setting aside time and creating an awareness of the relationship between physical illness and mental health. Thank you to our lovely audience for their wonderful participation today. We've come to the end of our final part on the discussion of the relationship between physical ailments and mental well-being. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We welcome all your lovely comments below. Until we meet again, signing off from all of us here at Aging Gracefully, a talk show for evergreens. Bye-bye.